What's up, everybody? It's your boy Melvin here, and this is October 1st, and you know what that means. Spooky season has just started, and what is a great time to start my annual tradition and telling one of my favorite ghost stories. But I'm doing something different. That's right. To start this October season, I'll start telling some stories, but today I'm going to read some of the stories written by Alvin Schwartz. To those who know that name, the man who wrote the most famous book from our childhood, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. So I'm going to read some of his stories here, and also this will be like an audio, so yeah. But don't worry, by Monday will be my reviews, which is my thoughts on Hocus Pocus 2, which will be tomorrow. No, Monday. Sorry. But let's begin the story, shall we? And the story of today is The Haunted House, from the first book of Scary Stories, which was released in 1981. And shall we begin? One time, a preacher went to see if he could put a haunt to rest at a house in his settlement. The house has been haunted for about 10 years. Several people have tried to stay there all night, but they always would get scared out by the haunt. So this preacher took his Bible and went to the house, went on in, built himself a good fire, lit a lamp, sat there reading the Bible. Then, just before midnight, he heard something start up in the cellar, walking back and forth. Then it sounded like somebody was trying to scream and got choked off. Then there was a lot of thrashing around and struggling, and finally everything got quiet. The old preacher took up his Bible again, but before he could start reading, he heard footsteps coming up the cellar stairs. He sat watching the door to the cellar, and the footsteps kept coming closer and closer. He saw the doorknob turn, and when the door began to open, he jumped and hollered, "What do you want?" The door shut back easy like, and there wasn't a sound. The preacher was trembling a little, but he finally opened the Bible and read a while. Then he got up and laid the book on the chair and went to mending the fire. Then the haunt started walking again, and step up the cellar stairs. The old preacher sat watching the door, saw the doorknob turn, and the door open. It looked like a young woman. He backed up and said, "Who are you? What do you want?" The haunt sort of swayed like she didn't know what to do. Then she just faded out. The old preacher waited, and when he didn't hear any more noises, he went over and shut the door. He was sweating and trembling all over, but all was a brave man, and he thought he'd be able to see through it. So he turned his chair to where he could watch, and he sat down and waited. It wasn't long before he heard the haunt start up again, slowly, step, closer and closer, step, and it was right at the door. But preacher stood up, held his Bible out before him. Then the knob slowly turned, and the door opened wide. This time the preacher spoke quite like he said, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, who are you and what do you want?" The haunt came right across the room, straight to him, and took hold of his coat. It was a young woman, about 20 years old. Her hair was torn and tangled. The flesh was dropping off her face so he could see the bones and part of her teeth. She had no eyes, but there was sort of blue light way back in her eye sockets, and she had no nose to her face. Then she started talking. It sounded like her voice was coming and going with the wind blowing it. She told her how her lover had killed her for her money and buried her in the cellar. She said if the preacher would dig up her bones and bury her properly, she could rest. Then she told him to take the end joint of her little finger from her left hand and to lay it in the collection plate at the next church meeting, and he find out who had murdered her. And she said, "If you come back here once more after that, you'll hear my voice at midnight, and I'll tell you where my money is hid, and you can give it to the church." The haunt sobbed like she was tired, and she sunk down towards the floor and was gone. The preacher found her bones and buried them in the graveyard. The next Sunday, the preacher put the finger bone in the collection plate. When a certain man happened to touch it, it stuck to his hand. The man jumped up and rubbed and scraped and tore at the bone, trying to get it off. Then he went screaming like he was going crazy. Well, he confessed to the murder, and they took him to jail. After the man was hung, the preacher went back to the house one midnight, and the haunt's voice told him to dig under the heft rock. He did. He found a big sack of money where the haunt had held on to his coat. The print of those bony fingers was burned right into the cloth. It never did came out. Never steal money or murder someone for greed. But yeah, didn't have enough of ghost stories, eh? But here's one from the second book called Something Was Wrong from 1984. Shall we begin? One morning, John Sullivan found himself walking along a street downtown. He could not explain what he was doing there, or how he got there, or where he had been earlier. He didn't even know what time it was. He saw a woman walking toward him and stopped her. "I'm afraid I forgot my watch," he said and smiled. "Can you tell me what the time is?" When she saw him, she screamed and ran. Then John Sullivan noticed that other people were afraid of him. When they saw him coming, they flattened themselves against the building and ran across the street to stay out of his way. "There must be something wrong with me," John Sullivan thought. "I better go home." He hailed a taxi, but the driver took one look at him and sped away. John Sullivan did not understand what was going on, and it scared him. "Maybe somebody at home can come and get me," he thought. He found a telephone, called his wife, but a voice he did not recognize answered. "Is Miss Sullivan there?" he asked. "No, she's at a funeral," the voice said. "Mr. Sullivan was killed yesterday in an accident downtown." My. Sounds familiar. Sounds like the story from Tales from the Crypt. The guy left with his friend. There was an accident. He thought he survived. Everybody started screaming. He went back to his friend who was blind. When he looked in the mirror, he was a rotting corpse. Sounds interesting. But yeah, I think I have time for one more story. This story is called The Wreck. Fred and Jean went to the same high school, but they met for the first time at a Christmas dance. Fred had come by himself, so had Jean. So Fred decided that Jean was the one of the nicest girls he had ever met. They danced together most of the evening. At 11 o'clock, Jean said, "I have to leave now. Can you give me a ride?" "Sure," he said. "I got to go home too. Actually drove my car into a tree on the way over here," Jean said. "I guess I wasn't paying attention." Fred drove her to the head of the Brady Road. He was in the neighborhood he didn't know very well. "Why don't you drop me off here?" Jean said. "The road ahead is in really bad condition. I can walk from here." Fred stopped the car, held out some tinsel. "Have some," he said. "I got it at the dance." "Thank you," she said. "I'll put it in my hair." And she did. "Would you like to go out sometime? To a movie or something?" Fred asked. "That will be fun," Jean said. After Fred drove off, he realized that he didn't know Jean's last name or her telephone number. "I'll go back," he thought. "The road can't be that bad." He drove slowly down Brady Road, through a thick woods, but there wasn't a sign of Jean. As he came around a curve, he saw the wreckage of a car ahead. It had crashed into a tree and had caught fire. Smoke was still rising from it. As Fred made his way to the car, he could see someone trapped inside, crushed against the steering column. It was Jean. In her hair was a Christmas tinsel he had given her. In other words, who he was talking to was not a live one, but her ghost. Strange. Poor boy. He didn't get the girl he wanted. Well, he got the one that came back from the grave. And there's faking from the wreck. But yeah, I think that'll be it for today. As you know, the month is still young. I see you guys in the review on Monday. And oh boy, I got a good review for you guys on Monday. So until then, have a great night, everybody, and stay spooky.